Welcome to the Law of One. I am Robert. It is my pleasure to share with you conscious channeling of LL research, messages of love and light, unity of our one infinite Creator. Our question today has to do with the purpose of third density, as entities are graduated from the second density, where the way of being is the group mind. They come into third density with the opportunity of individuating, of developing an individualized consciousness that will be able to aid its own evolution by the choices that it makes. Free will choices. And we would like QO to give us information about how this individuation then will lead into another kind of group mind, a social memory complex, and maybe a little bit of information about how the group mind of second density differs from the social memory complex that we're moving towards as the result of the individual choices that we make in the third density. So, could QO give us a kind of overview of how this all works, of how the nature of the choice, the intention behind the choice, where does the metaphysical or magical personality come in here? We would appreciate anything you could tell us about how third density works. We are those of the principle known to you as QO, and we greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator, in whose service we come to you this day. We thank you for calling us to your group to talk about the function of the third density experience, and we are delighted to share our opinions upon this subject, with the request beforehand to each of you to guard your powers of discrimination well. We would ask that each of you be responsible for that which you take in and that which you leave behind. We cannot possibly hit the mark on all of our remarks. Some of them are bound to be useless to each of you. We ask you not to take them in without considering carefully whether they resonate in your own process and whether they feel like something that you might have forgotten but knew all along. If it feels like that and resonates, then it is your truth for this particular point in your particular process. Otherwise, it perhaps bears no use whatsoever and would be best left behind. If you each will guard your free will and the process by which you take in new concepts and make them your own, we will feel free to speak our mind. We thank each of you for allowing us this consideration. Often, the Confederation channels with which this group has long been associated have called third density the density of choice. It is a vivid, intense, rather brief period in cosmic terms, during which an entity, as the question suggests, moves in consciousness from the consciousness of late second density life forms, such as your predecessor, the great ape, to the nascent life form of an entity with a fourth density body and fourth density lessons to learn. In between that second density experience of the animal kingdom and the vegetable and mineral worlds, and the experience of the density of love, or understanding, or compassion, lies the density of choice. That is the experience within which you are immersed at this time. It is undoubtedly an experience that has not been tranquil entirely, not an experience in which the shape of the life has seemed at all times appropriate and desirable. It is an experience of artifice and illusion. One could almost call it a day at the carnival, and yet it is a carnival whose every ride has a carefully designed purpose, and whose grounds are laid out in such a way as to provide an infinitely responsive feedback system to echo and intensify thoughts and desires that have more than a transitory value. It is an environment couched in forgetfulness. It is to say that a requirement for preparation to enter third density is the requirement to place in safekeeping the detailed memory of that metaphysical or time-space world from which you came in order to enter incarnation in third density. Regardless of the density from which you have came, whether it was from the second density into third, or from a higher density, looping back into third density for more work within that crucible. The preconditions of entering third density are alike: that direct knowledge, or as this instrument would say, gnosis of the Creator and of the self as an integral part of the Creator, must be placed aside, and the veil of forgetting must drop, so that each entity that comes into third density comes into it blind and without the possibility of sight, in a very specific way. That being that in terms of metaphysical as opposed to physical process, there is a carefully structured environment in which hints will constantly be given concerning the nature of that underlying ground of being, which has been veiled over by the veil of forgetting, while keeping any sort of objective proof from muddying the waters of unknowing. There is a determined bias within the Creator concerning this particular third density towards keeping entities as much in the dark as possible concerning the way things really are underneath the appearance of things. It is a recipe that is designed to be confusing, frustrating, maddening, and displacing. It is felt as the harvest of many experiences that while more information in a more transparent third density is a more comfortable experience, in the end it is a more confusing, a less effective, and a less valuable and a less viable third density experience in terms of serving as the ambience within which seeking souls are able consciously to effect an acceleration of their learning and evolution. The third density experience of this particular planet is extremely vivid. The consensus reality illusion is extremely heavy, and it is correspondingly difficult to penetrate. This means that there is great potential for experiencing intense emotions and desires. It is the product of these things, the feelings, the biases, the various elements of a person's makeup that the environment of third density is designed to bring into greater and greater relief, so that each seeking entity has complete free will to look at the experience of living in any way that is chosen. The Creator does not have to hope that something will occur, because the experience of all previous creations has been that evolution is inevitable. Change is inevitable. It may be change regressing towards the destiny left behind, or it may be change progressing towards the destiny ahead. But it is impossible for entities to remain completely stable. They must create novelty. They must move. That is the restless and insatiable nature of consciousness itself. It shall, by the machinations of endless free will, always have that curiosity about what else there may be to learn that pulls the entity onward. Whether the entity is considered in terms of the microcosm or the macrocosm. So each of you dwells now within a school that is carefully designed to give each entity its hard knocks on a regular basis. Not in order to indicate the cruelty or the judgment of the creative principle, but to create a schooling atmosphere in which entities are self-schooled by their own hand, by their own mind, by their own perceived problems and solutions. Now, let us look at this word choice. What happens in terms of how third density functions as each entity comes to choices. This is a true key word for this density. Choice is at the center of learning here. Choice is at the center of learning here. For upon the choice of polarity rests the work of the next few millennia, the next few million years, shall we say. From your point of view, what is the nature of choice? From the second density point of view, from the hive mind, shall we say, choice has a certain cast in nature which may be understood best by seeing that species of animals and of plants have a common pool of being. The spirits have created growth and life using the elements of the Creator that have been provided, such as seeds and sunlight, are able to dip into this pool of type or kind. The created specimens of that kind. These entities are created with a kind of consciousness that has a great deal of information in it, which is copied from the pool as a whole rather than being taken from any individual within the species. Consequently, it may be assured, unless an animal, for instance, has had a great deal to do with humans who have altered the second density programming for that animal, that an animal will act according to the actions of its species. While there are always rogues in any species that do not act according to the species, for the most part, one is dealing in an animal of second density with an entity that is making choices according to the choices programmed into its kind. When an entity graduates from second density to third, it becomes an entity which has not been taken out of a pool of consciousness, but rather must stand upon its own very shaky legs of individuality. It is still equipped with the second density information, but with the veil of forgetting over most of it. So in a way, it has lost a great deal of valuable ground. Things that were obvious to second density animals, because there was no conscious mentation in the genetic programming, became not at all obvious to an entity who is programmed heavily towards conscious and individualized thought. In other words, a third density entity has complete freedom of will built into it. Now, when you gaze at an entity that has just entered third density, you are gazing at an entity who does not know what to do with free will. It does not know that it is free. It does not know that it was, at one time, pent in a cage of genetic assumptions, and in fact, it may still be acting upon many of those assumptions, for they are part of the intrinsical package that is dimly remembered, if not clearly recalled. When such a third density pioneer begins to make choices, they are likely to be made according to second density programming. In other words, a choice of action will generally be decided to protect the self and the tribe or the family, and to secure for that family the resources necessary for its survival. While this is simple and even elementary programming, at the same time, the tentacles of the instinct for survival being so many and so far-reaching that simple programming may indeed control a large amount of the life decisions of an early third density entity. Slowly, usually through a series of many incarnations, the third density entity begins to develop a core sense of self that returns with a bit more strength from incarnation to incarnation, so that there is not quite as much veil as there used to be, and at some point there is the experience of awakening. That awakening is an awakening to the possibilities that there are, as this instrument would say according to the modern idiom, outside of the box. Now the box is simply the genetic assumptions given in second density that have been accepted by the third density entity. Society, as this instrument knows it, and as each of you know it within your Western civilization, retains a great many of the characteristics of the late second density structure. The family structure, the way society is organized into extended family systems and into those who ally for survival, are structures which retain second density characteristics. However, as entities begin to awaken, they begin to see something very important for third density work. That awakening begins when the realization occurs that the choice is not either or. The choices are infinite. When the viewpoint begins to expand, when the mountain first disappears and then reappears, then that third density soul begins to see that it is not a matter of becoming better at making choices. It is a matter of becoming more able to see the full range of choices. To see that it is not, for instance, a choice between belief in a certain principle and a belief in no creative principle. Rather, the choice is an infinite range of possibilities concerning the Godhead principle. There is a movement from a very firmly vectored angle of attack at things and making decisions to an increasingly loose, rounded, and multi-directional way of looking at the present moment. It has often been noted in the conversations with this group that so many things are interconnected and that information is available virtually in every thing that you lay your eyes on. The question then becomes, what is that object, that word, that person, that catalyst actually attempting to tell you? And as the third density soul begins to grow in its maturity, it begins to realize the endless and infinite gradations of meaning that can be received when one peels away any present moment to see layer after layer after layer of insight, suggested, hinted at, sparkling on the wind, glistening in the trees, just waiting for the connection of heart and attention. The choice then is not simply a choice in a certain situation, but even more so, a choice of attitude, a choice of how to be, how to stand, how to express one's essence in the most full and honest way. There is another key word that we would look at, and that is individualization. It was part of your query, and it is a very tricky concept from a metaphysical point of view. Many times this instrument has tried to respond in letters to questions from people concerning whether it is service to self or service to others to take time before the self to learn, to study, and to begin to become familiar with the self deeply, and to know the self in a non-transient manner. There is tremendous validity in this process of individualization, of researching and learning the self, and indeed this process will go on as long as the individual retains flesh and blood around that particular personality shell. It is then a process that is never completed. It is not intended to be completed. Rather, it is one of the ways of learning to serve and to grow within the third density atmosphere. Until one has individuated, one cannot begin magical work, and yet one is never fully individuated. So logically speaking, one could never begin magical work. Yet there is, shall we say, a critical mass, only that needs to be reached, and it is by no means a large percentage of the actual available will of an entity. It is a very powerful thing to become aware of one's own will, and because of the use of it, even imperfectly, and even incorrectly or without full knowledge, tremendous energies can be set in motion. So the magical process begins to take place as soon as an entity begins to ask of the Creator or perceived guidance directly. Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I here? And what would you have me do? These kinds of queries are those that create a magical circumstance. Certainly it is well to be as mature as one may be before asking such questions. And yet, the glory of third density is that all are imperfect. And yet all are asking those questions. These are the questions that drive third density. Consequently, entities on the spiritual path are constantly asking for and getting much more information than they were prepared to deal with. Often they do not recognize that they are receiving that which they requested and feel that there is no sense to the experience. Yet that too becomes perfectly acceptable, for no matter how the experiences that have been created by the questions are used, they in turn shall be that which will create the seeds that are sown for the next generation of learning. And those seeds will fall into good soil and have the possibility of growth, regardless of whether one road or another road is taken, regardless of the choices made. The result will be a net gain in understanding. So it is in some ways a hard ambience in which to learn. In other ways, it is a very forgiving ambience in that one cannot fail. One can become weary and rest. But one can always pick up the self when one feels again ready to enter the fray and ask again and again, receive the information, and again work with that information. As the soul of third density begins to live consciously and make choices from a more aware standpoint as regards its own essence, the ability to do magical work increases, and entities begin to have an inkling of what it is like to be part of a living organism that has more than one center of consciousness. Many times this is first encountered in the small groups connected with family. That lucky family that happens to have a spiritual connection and experiences a common dedication to that which is beyond them. This occurs often in musical families, or in families of scholarship, or in healers such as medical doctors. These are the first nascent experiences of thinking as individuals and yet as one group, working as one, unified for a goal, whether it is to make music, to solve a complicated medical problem, or to resolve a fascinating scientific question. It is seldom, however, found that entities are able to enter into the unity of fourth density while within third density bodies. And we note this present group, in attempting to create a fourth density consciousness within its group is indeed attempting that which is only marginally possible. Yet, at the same time, the attempt not only creates a greatly advantageous learning situation for those attempting such a thing, it also creates, as the one known as V has suggested, that place where fourth density qualities may dwell, survive, and thrive. These kinds of desires to create heaven on earth will hone and polish the honesty of each entity and will, if followed carefully, create a growing awareness of the fluidity and flexibility of truth. The things that separate entities within third density are those things which are assumed. Some assumptions must be made in order to function. What assumptions entities have in common is very critical. The choices made by entities striving as this group is striving become more intense and more capable of making powerful changes in consciousness in the process of their being made because of the purity of the desire to stand in the light of love and be unified with the higher forces of love. This also creates an atmosphere in which experiences which are generated from the ambience of such an atmosphere are very sharp and often painful. It is, as this instrument would say, a very fast track, one that enables one to lift up and bring the self into an atmosphere of change and learning and energizing of that learning by conscious dedication. It is that which tests the metsley and the determination of the seeker. Anytime an entity attempts to do what this instrument would call light work, to better the planet and its people, to serve as a beacon, and so forth, that choice brings into being a time of testing. And the more there is the desire to serve and to learn, the more the testing shall occur. It is a self-governing system that must operate as it does in order for free will to be preserved, and in order for choices to be made, and in order for choices to be tested, refined, and evolved. For a choice tends to move to another choice, and so forth. And that is a spiraling system that builds upon itself. Each choice building upon itself or working to correct a previous choice made. Again, this is always at the discretion of the individual. The late third density entity, then, the one who is ready for graduation, is an entity who knows itself well enough that it is ready to open itself completely to the offering of all other entities with which it shall work, has re-entered a group mind, but it is not the same as any other of that group mind. Rather, it is appreciated by the group for its flavors, no matter how harsh or pungent they may be. The group will use that uniqueness where it is needed according to the genus of that group. It is very difficult for a third density entity even to believe in, much less experience, the power of the oversoul of a group. And yet, as soon as two entities make a true bond, there is a group soul. As soon as three entities are able to unify to a certain critical mass, there is a group spirit, just as there is one to the LL research attendees that has grown over a period now of some 50 plus years, and it is a very real source of guidance to those who call upon it. There are potential training wheels available for a nascent fourth density type constructed at this time simply because this group has continued for a long period of time to attempt to unify itself more and more so that all within the group are attempting to serve together. There is a tremendous collaboration in service and in learning that comes into being as fourth density ways are taken over from third density and at this time within your planet's experience. These possibilities for fourth density structures and interactions become more and more viable, as the one known as Bob Dylan said, "The times they are a-changin'." The energy is changing, the vibration is changing, and fuller love is possible. What choices shall you make? What polarity do you wish to study? This is the great choice, and there is no issue too large or too small to contain grist for the mill and information that will be helpful in pursuing those choices. This instrument informs us that we have talked as long as we should upon this subject. We thank you, my brothers and sisters. We thank each of those who has attended this group this day. We thank you for putting aside this time and for putting aside the daily grind and the concerns that have been on your hearts. Simply to empty the self and to come into that place where questions are asked. It is hoped that resources have been added to your arsenal. We leave each of you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. We are known to you as those of QO. Adonai, Adonai, my friends.